And from Jerusalem, Emmanuel Navon, he teaches international relations at Tel Aviv University. Welcome to all of you. All right, let's go to Emmanuel Navon in Jerusalem. And I suppose people in Israel have been glued to their TV sets as they have been here in the West. The government strategy in terms of communication and in terms of reopening the internet but targeting foreign journalists, your thoughts on it? Will it pay off ultimately for the Mubarak regime?
Well, I don't think that it will eventually, because we just have to remember what happened in Tunisia. And the question is really whether the army in Egypt will decide or not to support the Mubarak regime. I think that based on what has happened in the past few days in Egypt, it looks pretty obvious that there is a real and authentic movement to get rid of this regime, this authoritarian regime in Egypt. But as I said, a lot will depend on the behavior of the army.
All right. Emmanuel Navon, let me ask you this question. Does the U.S. understand Egypt? Does the U.S. understand the Middle East?
Well, first of all, I'm sorry to tell you that Israel does not control the Egyptian government. I mean, we don't have as much power as some people would think. And with regard to the United States, does the United States understand Egypt? I think the United States, like any country in the world, has its own interests in the region. So does Iran, by the way. And the question is today, the fact that the United States has been supporting the Mubarak regime against the self-declared principles of support for democracy by the United States, it is true. But it is also true that the alternative to a Mubarak regime might be worse, because it is true that the Egyptian people want freedom, but don't forget that free elections in Egypt might be taken over by the Muslim Brotherhood, and that the major power in the region would become Iran itself. Would that be better for the freedom of the Egyptian people? I'm not sure.
Emmanuel Navon, when Tiananmen Square happened, the first thing they did was shut down the satellite dishes for the foreign television stations. Again, we don't have any live images today from at least tonight, from Tahrir Square. Your thoughts on what will transpire in the coming days?
Well, my thoughts, of course, is that nobody wants a repetition of Tiananmen. But as I said, everybody wishes that the Egyptian people will be free, and that what's going on today in Egypt will more look like what happened in Europe in 1989. And of course, as I said before, not to what happened in Iran in 1979. So as Israelis, we of course wish the best to the Egyptian people and to be free. And we very much hope that Egypt will turn into a real democracy, because history has shown us that peace agreements are more stable between democratic countries than with authoritarian regimes. This being said, as I mentioned before, we very much hope and pray that this democracy will remain so and will not be taken over by extremist forces like it happened in other Arab countries in the past.
Emmanuel Navon, earlier you mentioned to us the worst-case scenario for Israel, which is an Islamist regime taking the place in Egypt. But couldn't it also be possible that perhaps in the whole Arab world, what the message that people are talking about is more of political pluralism, that this is no longer Iran 1979?
Hopefully so. Obviously, I very much hope so. I remind you that after the Iraqi war in 2003, there were attempts by the Bush administration at the time to push for democratization in the Arab world, first and foremost in Iraq, later on in Lebanon. Unfortunately, we've seen what's happened lately of Lebanese democracy. I very much hope that eventually the Arab world, like the rest of the world, will become democratic. That's an aspiration that we have as a free country, as the only free country in the region. And we very much hope in Israel that we won't be able to say for very long that we're the only democracy in the region, and that our neighbors also will become democratic. And I think that if they do, it will completely and definitely contribute to promoting peace between Israel and its neighbors.